Greetings, Earthlings. Ha! Bicho Feo here. My new series is going to be all about inexpensive records that really are great. I'm going to call it some cheap heat. You could also say Chibis The Shred. Again, it's beauty's in the eye of the beholder. You might not agree with some of these selections. This is a very limited selection. Quite a few records out there that are not that expensive that are great. They might not be exactly what you're jonesing for at the moment, but when you've lost that auction on eBay or when you've missed out on that tremendous garage sale that somebody had, sometimes you need to lick your wounds, make yourself feel better with some knowledge. And my experience in record collecting has led me to believe that most really great records still don't cost all that much. And especially if you like fusion, jazz rock, whatever you want to call it, progressive rock, or jazz. That's mostly what I'm going to be concentrating on with this stuff. And feel free to share your selections below. Maybe I'll talk about them later. Kind of got sick of bragging about all the great stuff I find, which is mostly online anymore. It's kind of pathetic. Anyway, I picked out about a dozen, maybe 10 records to talk about this week or this month, however often I'm going to do it. These are all kind of jazz rock fusion sorts of records from the 70s for the most part. I've got a separate batch of 80s records to discuss separately. There's just so much of this stuff out there that it's going to take forever to talk about it all. Anyway, without any further ado, I'm going to start off with the mother of all Chibis The Shred. If you don't have this in your collection, you profess to like jazz or progressive rock or fusion, and you don't have this record, you need to find it. And it's not that expensive, although there is a bit of a buzz about this. There's some mystery surrounding this guy. He disappeared after recording this one record, and nobody knows what happened to him. Some of the other band members suffered a similar fate. It's truly a phenomenal record, and some of you already know what I'm talking about. Hermann, Szobel's first and only record for Arista Records, recorded in the late 70s. Had an incredible saxophone player on it named Vadim Viadro, who also is lost. This is an incredible record. It's just full of crazy multi-level compositions, raging playing from all people concerned. Can't say enough good things about this. This guy was 18 years old. He showed up, said, "I'm the greatest," and proceeded to knock everybody in the studio out with his playing. I guess he had some connections in the business, and Roberta Flack helped him, I guess, finance and get this going as a project, and it became a viable project. He was supposed to be recording a follow-up to it and disappeared and hasn't been heard from since. It's a mystery. Anyway, still available relatively cheaply. I would say a cheap record is one that's less than $10. I think you could probably find this for less than $10 still, even though there's a little bit of a buzz. Can't say enough good things about it. The backing band, most of them are not around anymore. The drummer, Bobby Goldberg, passed. The vibes player, Dave Samuels, is still with us, luckily, as is the bassist, Michel Viseglia, who rose to fame with Suzanne Vega, of all people. Anyway, this is kind of one of those strange, ill-fated records, and if you find it, get it, if you don't have it already. And even if you do have it already, it's so good you'll want to buy it. Next up, also on Arista, Miroslav Vitous, Majesty Music. He recorded a couple of records for Arista in between his Warner Brothers record, which is known by many, Magical Shepherd, and before he started recording somewhat more conventional music for ECM. He did these couple records for Arista that are really good fusion records. This is kind of a continuation of Magical Shepherd. There's a lot of similarities. The personnel's different. In fact, it features some of the tracks have the same drummer as the Szobel record. Bobby Goldberg, I think was his name. And the band's great. There's Lenny White's on it. There's another bassist on it because Miroslav Vitous plays a lot of keys and a lot of piccolo bass on it. Ramona Francis, the wonderful Israeli vocalist, is on it. She did a great solo record on MPS BASF in the 70s, which unfortunately is not cheap. But that said, I always see these albums languishing. This and the other one he did for Arista, which I have somewhere, and I thought I had it in the stack here, but it's not there. Anyway, this has got a lot of crazy tempos on it. Some great saxophone playing from Yaroslav Jakubowicz. It's just a really fine record all around, and if you really dig Magical Shepherd and you don't have this one, pick it up. It's a little bit more varied. The tracks are short, but a lot of them have the same vibe. Lots of crazy synthesizer stuff and funky bass playing and drumming. I think he was on a personal mission to show Joe Zawinul that he was funky, because Joe Zawinul said he didn't want him in Weather Report because he wasn't funky enough. But this record's really funky. Okay, so moving on. This guy, Sam Morrison, there's quite a bit of buzz around him in the late 70s because Miles Davis, who was retired after Get Up With It, he kind of went into reclusive cocooning for almost half of a decade before he came back with The Man with the Horn in the 80s. He was jamming with this guy. Sam Morrison was jamming with Miles along with a keyboard player named Masabumi Kikuchi, who I'll get to in a minute, whose music is playing in the background, and Larry Coryell and Al Foster. They were all jamming and hanging out, and the music never really got released. It's been bootlegged. You can get some of it in bits and pieces here and there. Like I said, it's been bootlegged, etc., etc. This album's really interesting. Morrison recorded 2 albums that I know of under his own name, and fine tenor saxophone player, sort of in a Michael Brecker, Bob Berg sort of mode. Maybe not quite that accomplished, but really good. And this album's quite varied. There's some definitely heavy fusion stuff on this. And interestingly, the guitarist on this is Kevin Shreve, who is Michael Shreve's brother. I thought that was really interesting. So there's good personnel on this. T.M. Stevens is on bass, who was with McLaughlin for a while. Narada Michael Walden on drums. You really can't miss with this record. It's a really good one, and I think there's a copy for like $2 on Discogs. Not a lot of people know about Sam Morrison. His other record, Dune, is on Inner City, a wonderful label that produced many now affordable records at Shred. And you should look out for that too. But this one is the superior one of the 2, I think. It kind of gets out there in a really nice way. Sam Morrison, Natural Layers, on the Chiaroscuro label. Actually, this is the same label that did the James Mason record that everybody goes crazy over. Oh, and also Taraka Blue is on that same label. But this... Oh, there's the back cover. This record is the equal of the Taraka Blue record, I think, but goes for 1/100th of the price. Frankly, I don't understand. There's no justice in this world. Speaking of Masabumi Kikuchi, he's a wonderful, wonderful musician who recently passed, and he made a number of really interesting records. To describe him as a visionary would not be stretching the truth at all. He definitely had his own quirky vision of what music was, is, and could do in your mind. And he liked playing around with rhythms a lot. Loved strange harmonies, unexpected sounds. Anyway, he recorded mostly in Japan for Japanese companies in the 90s and 2000s. He recorded mostly acoustic stuff with guys like Paul Motion and Gary Peacock. But he went through an extensive electric phase. He also recorded with Gil Evans. And like I said, he was hanging out with Miles during his retirement years. Anyway, this album on Columbia, not a lot of people know about, not a lot of people talk about it. It's called Susto. Of course, it came out in Japan first. But it was issued in the US, and it went nowhere. But it's a great record. It's a great record. It's what's playing in the background. There's sort of a goofy reggae tune. And now they're getting to this pulsy sort of trancy, hypnotic Miles thing. And if you like that kind of music, you gotta have this record. It's so good. All kinds of great players on it. Sam Morrison's on wind synthesizer, Richie Morales on drums, a bunch of really interesting musicians are on this record. Let me read the credits. Steve Grossman, Dave Liebman, James Mason is on it, Barry Finnerty, Aerto, Terumasa Hino. Yeah, so there you go. You hear the Miles influence right there with that wah organ. So if you missed out on this record, it's languishing in a dollar bin somewhere, I am sure. Very easy to find and solid listening for the jazz rock fusion aficionado. Kikuchi also recorded on Inner City an album with the group named Kochi, and this is essentially the group that was recording with Miles, except no Larry Coryell and no Miles, obviously. But Dave Liebman, Steve Grossman, Reggie Lucas is on this, Al Foster, and it continues in sort of that Agartha, Dark Magus, Pangea, sort of dark, scary rock fusion type sound. It's a little bit more raucous than Susto. And like I said, it's a group effort. I file it in the collection under Kikuchi, but it's really a group record. And it's on the Inner City label, which, frankly, if you're looking for good records that don't cost too much, Inner City is a gold mine of stuff like that. They did their own productions. You know, they did the Ray Wilkes record. They did the Ernie Krivda records. Those didn't come out any other way. But they also bought the licenses of records that were available in Europe and Japan from Enja and Steeplechase and Trio Records, and they put them out in the U.S. And you know, I don't know about vinyl and recording quality, et cetera, but if you're not too picky about that stuff, or if it doesn't matter at all, I mean, you can have some of these records that are as imports worth a lot more for peanuts. And it's really worth tracking down these Inner City records. I'm crazy about that label. I really like that label. Continuing on the Japanese tip, Terumasa Hino did a number of really great records. A lot of his records are inexpensive, and they are not just good, but they are incredible. This is one of them, and this is really inexpensive. It's called Double Rainbow, in case you didn't read it. And it's very much in the vein of Kikuchi's record Susto that's playing now. In fact, this is Hino right now playing the trumpet solo. This might be a little bit more up-tempo and jazzy, but it's the same kind of electric, sort of jungle kind of feeling. Lots of strange synthesizer noises and long tracks with solos and bizarre rhythms, and I really like this record a lot. It's really excellent. A lot of his records from Japan have been reissued in the US on the Catalyst label, another great source of bargain-priced pressings that could be had for next to nothing. All of his records on the Catalyst label I highly recommend. Some of them are just out of this world and a must. And you know, you get them now, and later on when you have the time or money, you get the originals if you want, if you're that crazy. But Chibis The Shred, this is the definition. Wonderful record, Double Rainbow. It's on Columbia. Should not set you back more than a couple of bucks. There's a lot of famous artists that do records that are relatively inexpensive. I mean, if you're feeling bad, you're feeling down, you can always buy an Oregon record or a Jean-Luc Ponty record. You know, these are good records, and they don't cost much. Herbie Mann is another example of an artist who did some pretty cool stuff, and none of it goes for very much money. One of Mann's records deserves special mention, though, in the Chibis The Shred, Cheap Heat realm, and it's this, Gagaku and Beyond. Gagaku, I don't know how to pronounce it. Strangely enough, it was distributed by NMDS, the New Music Distribution Service, and it's on Finidar Records, which was sort of an experimental label. It was later, I think, distributed by Atlantic or Warner Brothers, one of the biggies, and they didn't need NMDS anymore, but at this early stage of its development, I guess it did. This is a rather incredible record. It's Herbie Mann working in partnership with another big name that some of you may recognize, Minoru Muraoka, who recorded some very sought-after and rare sides in Japan, in the late 60s, early 70s that are highly sought after for samples, etc., etc. Cost, like $100 or whatever. This, from what I've heard on those records, this is almost as good as those records, if not better. Certainly more jazzy, less groovy, and kind of out, actually. And about half the tracks have Mann's band on it, which at the time consisted of Tony Levin on bass, Steve Gadd on drums, Pat Rebolo on Fender Rhodes, I think Armin Halburian on percussion, somebody like that. And they were sort of paired up with Minoru Muraoka's traditional Japanese ensemble. And they sort of mix and match throughout the record. Some tracks are dominated by the Japanese ensemble, some tracks are dominated by Mann's group. It's a really cool record, and definitely of all the Herbie Mann records I've owned, this is the one that will remain in the collection, and it can be had for peanuts. It's not rare or sought after even. People just don't know about it. I've always been super, super, super into heavy fusion, like, the guitar, Mahavishnu derived stuff. That's my favorite music. And even in that realm, I haven't discovered everything yet. Unfortunately, it took the passing of a band member to bring this album to my attention. The drummer, Ted Reichman, who was the leader of Gamelan, died a rather untimely death a few years ago. And a mutual friend said, "I can't believe you don't have those records." I didn't have those records. I didn't have any of them. And he said, you need to really find a Gamelan record because you will dig it tremendously. And I went out, seriously, found this copy for $1. It was sealed. And proceeded to be blown away by it. 2 guitars, bass, and drums. It's an 80s fusion record, but it sounds like it was made in the late 70s or mid 70s. Just that sort of high energy, kind of like the Dixie Dregs without the bluegrass country component. You know what I'm getting at. There's a little bit of keyboards, I think, on 1 or 2 tracks, played by the guy from Spyro Gyra. And that's kind of why I wrote these guys off. One, because it was the 80s and most fusion was awful in the 80s. But secondly, I don't know about you, but this looks like a smooth jazz record to me. But it's not. I mean, you got a gong, you got a parrot. It looks like smooth jazz to me. I don't know. But no, it's actually really high energy, very cool fusion, great playing all around, really cool compositions. And who'da thunk it? Who'da thunk it? Another cheapie that shreds. Here's a record that's always baffled me. This is from the early 70s. This is going back in time, and there's a number of really interesting personnel connections on this record. And it's still cheap. It's a little bit more pricey than some of the other ones I've been talking about. And some people, sometimes you go into a record store and this will be priced ridiculously high because it's an old record. But it still can be found if you put a little bit of energy into it for less than $10. And it's this record. Contraband is the name of the band. That's partially one of the reasons why I think it remains inexpensive, because the name of the band is kind of lame. Time and Space is the name of the record. It's from '72. Features guitarist David Pritchard, who played with Gary Burton for a while and recorded 2 albums under his own name for the Inner City label, which are also quite excellent and probably pretty inexpensive. It also features a guy named Peter Robinson on keyboards, not the Peter Robinson from Brand X, different Peter Robinson. This is the US-born Peter Robinson who played with Phil Woods in his band. And he also had his own record label called Testament Records. And the Phil Woods record on Testament Records is wonderful. It's another, it could also have fit into this Chibis The Shred thread here. Maybe someday I'll bring it out and talk about it. Anyway, really excellent early electric jazz, kind of like the Fourth Way, but a little bit more out. And again, not a lot of people know about this. Electric piano with Fender Rhodes with lots of effects. Great drumming by a guy named Brian Moffitt. Charles Orania on saxophones, who is a LA studio guy. I think he was on some of Zappa's records as a session man. Bruce Cale on bass. Bruce Cale is another really interesting guy from New Zealand. He migrated to England, where he played on the very first Spontaneous Music Ensemble record, and then came to the States. He did a bunch of sessions, was in this band. So you've got a lot of musical history going down here, and this is a really, really excellent electric jazz record. It's it's not really a fusion record in the sense of the word. If you like the Fourth Way, you like that Fender Rhodes heavy sound, this is a great record to get. Mentioned Jean-Luc Ponty a little while ago. A lot of his records are really good. I really like Jean-Luc Ponty. I'm a fan. I don't care what anybody says. Aurora is a great record. Enigmatic Ocean is a great record. Imaginary Voyage, a little cheesy, but still really good. On the Wings of Music's a good record. His earlier stuff for MPS is good. This record is great, and it can be found incredibly inexpensively. This is the original pressing on Festival, which is a bargain French label. I got it because of the gatefold, the notes, the pictures, you know. You want more info. This was issued several times over, and can be found in the US for less than $1. It was issued on the Musical Heritage label, not the Musical Heritage Society with the white covers, not that label, but the Heritage. I think it's just called Heritage, or Heliodor, or whatever. It's a super, super cheap bargain label. They used to sell these records at Barnes & Noble. They used to sell them at the college bookstores. That's where I picked up my copy. And I had the US copy for years, which has liner notes, but no gatefold. This has gatefold and extra pictures. Anyway, this is one of Ponty's strongest records, and it's got Stephane Grappelli on it, who's, I don't normally associate with him with fusion at all, but he actually does really well on this. He mixes in extremely well and plays really nice, and none of this is cheesy. It's got great personnel. One of my favorite drummers in the world is on this, Andre Ceccarelli. Tony Bonfils is on bass. He played on all those Jean-Paul Massera records. Keyboards by Alain Jean-Marie, who's a big-time French studio musician. And Philip Catherine on guitar. So it's a serious fusion record. Serious fusion record. Can be had for $1. If you're lucky, you could find the original pressing. You can certainly find the later US pressing for nothing. And they're everywhere. I've seen them at the thrift store. In good shape, too. Finally, I always refer to records like these as imports because I'm from the US and these records were made in Germany or somewhere abroad. So to you, if you're from Europe or whatever, they're not imports. So these might be super cheap over there. This is an import that could actually be found pretty cheaply in the US, and it shreds from beginning to end. The group is called Ruphus. They're Norwegian. And they feature keyboard player Håkon Graf, who's still around, still out there playing, still out there doing it. He later on put out a really nice trio record with John Christensen and Svein Hovensjo. I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He was also in the group Blowout. He was also in the group Moose Loose. The Blowout record's pretty inexpensive. Moose Loose, those will set you back some serious cash. This is very much like the Moose Loose records. Different instrumentation. There's no violin. There is a vocalist on this. She's really good, though. This record was produced by Terje Ripdahl also, so that makes it even better. It's a blazing hot, funky fusion record with some vocals on it. Really, really good. I was shocked by how good it was. I was also shocked by how inexpensive it was. Basically, the postage. If you get this one from Europe, the postage will cost you more than the record. That was my experience anyway, and I've had this for less than a year. So this is really good. The follow-up, they had a different vocalist who's not as good, and Håkon Graf had left the band, and the subsequent keyboard player wasn't as interesting. So maybe avoid that one. It's decent. This one is the one to get. So anyway, I hope you have found out something new about cheap records. Don't be discouraged, keep digging, and I'll come back with some more info on some different kinds of records in my next video. Thanks.